grade fours, and welcome to our next social studies unit. This time we are going to be learning about Alberta, the people, the land, and the stories. I think that this is one of the most important units in the grade four social studies curriculum because it's going to teach us Alberta's history and what happened on the land that we're currently living in hundreds of years ago. So we are walking on soil that used to belong to an Aboriginal group of people that were originally on this land. And we are going to learn about their stories and then how we came to be in this beautiful province. We're very lucky to live here, and I'm really excited for you to find out why. So please make sure you have your booklet ready for you. Last time you should have worked on some vocabulary words, colored your title page, and then done a KWL chart, what you know and what you want to know about Alberta's history and people. So today I'm just going to share my screen with you. We are going to be working on, let's just go down. We've done these pages. We are on to this page right here. I'm just gonna fix this view a little bit so it's easier to see. So the first word on this page that is important is Aboriginal. And that is probably a word that you've heard before. There is a little word inside the big word, and see for a second if you can find it right now. I'll say the word again, Aboriginal. You're right, it's just original is the word that's in there. So original, what does original mean? Well, you know that the original is the first thing that's there. So if I make a copy of a page, I keep the original one. That was the one that I copied. Or if there's like a trilogy of movies, like the first Toy Story is the original. Now there's 5 Toy Stories. So original just means the first one that was there. So that's the same here. Canada's first people were the Aboriginal or Indigenous peoples. The word Aboriginal is used to represent 3 different groups of peoples: the Inuit, the Métis, and the First Nations. So Aboriginal means these 3 groups: Métis, First Nations, Inuit. You've probably heard all of these words before, and now we're going to actually learn what they mean. So Métis, take a look at that word for a second. What do you notice about it that looks a little weird? You're right. It has a little symbol over top of the E, and that is very common in the French language. So Métis is a French word. The Métis people are people of mixed Indigenous and European ancestry. That means that the Métis people have ancestors that are both First Nations and people from Europe. We're going to learn more about the Métis later on in this unit, but I'll just keep reading. Although Métis people live throughout all of Canada, the Métis homeland is considered to be located in central Manitoba. The First Nation refers to the many nations of Indigenous people who live in Canada. There are over 600 First Nations throughout Canada. So that means 600 different nations inside of Canada. This includes, but is not limited to, the Cree, the Sayo, I'm gonna look up how to say that, the Dene, the Blackfoot, the Mohawk, the Oneida, and more. So those are just a few. I'm gonna have to work really hard on my pronunciation because I want to be respectful to these First Nation tribes. First Nations. So those are the Métis, these are the First Nations. First Nation refers to the many nations of Indigenous people who live in Canada. We said this. There are over 600 First Nations throughout Canada, all with different languages and traditions. So they're all so different. This includes, but not limited to, again, the Cree, the Sayo, Dene, Blackfoot, Mohawk, Oneida, and more. So mostly the ones that you would hear mostly in Alberta would be Cree and Blackfoot. Those are the most popular, but we will get into some of the other tribes. Each First Nation group has its own language, culture, customs, and beliefs. So think about that. There's 600 First Nations in in Canada, and they all have their own languages. They all have different cultures, customs, and different beliefs, so different religions. Lastly, we have the Inuit. The Inuit are the Aboriginal people of Canada who live primarily in the northern regions of the country. So up north in the Northwest Territories, the Yukon, Nunavut, The word Inuit means people, and the Inuit are known as Inuks. The Inuit have their own language and ways of life. Many online websites refer to the Inuit as well as other Aboriginal groups in the past tense, but the Inuit are very much present in Canada today. So that means that a lot of textbooks and history books say that the Inuit were people of the past, but that's not true. They are very much a part of the Canadian population. They live up north. There are many interesting facts about the Inuit, but one is that they are very grateful to the animals that they hunt for food, clothing, shelter, and more. In fact, they will honor animal spirits through rituals and songs. One thing that we're going to learn about a lot is the First Nations relationship with the land. They are very close to the land that they live on, and we're going to learn all about why and how they are close to the land. So just to recap, Aboriginal people include the Métis, the First Nations, and the Inuit. Now we're going to go into my favorite topic, history. So this is going to talk a little bit about the history of Aboriginal people and how they came to be in our country today. The First Nations people of Canada have a very long history. Archaeological evidence has been found all throughout Alberta and the rest of Canada that indicates that they have lived on these lands for at least 12,000 years. Let's unpack that a little bit. Archaeology is the study of human life, ancient human life. So let's talk about a word that it sounds like, paleontology, which is what we just talked about in our last unit. And paleontology was the study of ancient animal life, or dinosaurs, and archaeology is ancient human life. So let's also look at the number. These First Nations people have lived in Canada for 12,000 years. Think of what year it is this right now, 2021. 2021. These people have been here for 12,000 years. We'll get into that another time about how it could be and how we're only at 2021. But anyway, think about how long that is. They were here for almost 10,000 years longer than we were. Or 10,000 years before this year. There are many theories about when and how the first peoples reached Canada, but scientists do not agree on an exact theory. These people were nomadic, which means they did not live in one fixed spot, but rather moved across the land following the animals they hunted. So when you're nomadic, when you're a nomad, that just means you go from place to place. You don't have an exact home. You don't set up a town or a city. You go from place to place to place. So these people traveled all over Canada following the animals that they hunted. Some of the First Nation groups thought to have lived on the land known as Alberta 12,000 years ago include the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, Gros Ventre, Tsuut'ina, and Slavey peoples. Relationship to the land. So we've talked about that already. It's very important. Before the arrival of Europeans, that just means people from Europe, so people from England and France, First Nations people relied on the land for everything they might need. Through the land, they acquired food, shelter, tools, and more. The land was also a source of emotional and spiritual well-being. Plants and herbs would be used for healing. Many of today's First Nations people continue to rely on the land. So back before Europeans even got to Canada, because remember, the Europeans would have had to cross an entire ocean to get here. So before they were here, the First Nations were the only people in Canada. So there weren't cities, there weren't towns. These people traveled all the time. They had to rely on the land. They didn't have doctors, they didn't have dentists, they didn't have grocery stores. They hunted for everything that they consumed and wore and had. Systems of governing. So that just means like Canada has a Canada has a prime minister that leads us. Alberta has a premier, Jason Kenney, that leads us. We have mayors that lead us. So this is just the way that the First Nations chose their leaders and governed their people, like a government. The First Peoples had their own systems of organization, governing, and leadership. For example, the maternal system, where women were in charge of making decisions and had leadership roles, was very common. Maternal just means motherly, like a mother. Paternal means father. So maternal system just means women, mothers. So women were primarily the leaders of First Nations groups, which is very different from today. In Canada, we have a premier. He's a man. His name is Justin Trudeau. And in Alberta, we have a male leader as well named Jason Kenney. So a lot of times these leaders are men, but with First Nations, the leaders were a lot of the time women. Perhaps the most well-known system of governance that the First Nations people of Canada had was the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, also known as the Iroquois Confederacy. This form of government influenced the modern governments of both the United States and Canada. Watch the following video about this is a hard word, Haudenosaunee Confederacy to learn a little bit how this confederacy came to be. So if you could pause the video right now, go into Google Classroom and check out this video right here about the Haudenosaunee Conference or Confederacy, and then come back to this video and continue. I apologize if I'm saying that wrong. I'm going to keep working to make sure I'm saying these words right. Okay, welcome back. I hope you learned a lot about that confederacy, and maybe you can try saying the word or what it's called. So we're going to keep going with history. We're on oral storytelling. Oral just means by mouth, so talking, like speaking. So it was very important for the First Nations to use storytelling to tell about their history. Oral storytelling, which means telling stories with your voice, was and continues to be very important to First Nations cultures. Knowledge and history have been passed down from generation to the next through oral storytelling. In fact, because of oral storytelling, many First Nation peoples believe that their ancestors have lived on North American land for even longer than scientists predict. So think about how we collect history and how Europeans have collected history. When I went to school to study history, I mostly got my information from books and textbooks and articles. So much of our history has been written down. The First Nations history has been told time and time again through stories. So the grandparents are telling their grandchildren, and those children are telling their grandchildren, and over. So these stories just keep being told over and over, and that's how they remember their history. So there are many stories that have been passed down from generation to generation. For example, the Ojibwe people have a story of creation that explains how North America came to be. So this is their idea of how our country, Canada, and the North America is both Canada and the United States. That's our continent. So this Ojibwe story tells about how the Ojibwe people believed that our continent came to be, North America. So please take a minute now and watch this video. I think it's just called Ojibwe Creation Story. Click that, it's in the Google Classroom. Once you are done, you're going to, in your own words, retell the story that you hear and just try your very best. Try to remember what happened. You can tell it in short form. Please use full sentences. This is going to be looked at by me later, and I want to make sure you do a good job. So take some time, watch the video, and do a good job explaining the story. So you're just retelling the story, kind of like how the First Nations passed down information, but we are going to write it down. All right, everyone. Like I said, I'm very excited for these next lessons. They're going to be very, very interesting, and we're going to learn a lot about Alberta. So tune in next time to learn about more about the First Nations. Thank you for paying attention, and I hope you do a good job on your story.